My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 60 years old, and I never imagined that the metallic taste in my mouth would be the first sign that my own son wanted me dead. Let me take you back to that ordinary Tuesday morning when everything changed. I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, a dizziness that made the bedroom spin like a carousel. Edward, my husband of 40 years, clutched his stomach beside me, his face pale as chalk. We had been feeling this way for weeks now, the nausea, the fatigue, the strange tingling in our fingers. We blamed it on age, on stress, on the burden of living. But deep in my bones, in that place where a mother's intuition lives, I knew something was terribly wrong. David, our youngest son, had moved back in with us 6 months earlier. He claimed it was to help us, to take care of us in our golden years. How generous, everyone said, how loving. But I noticed things, small things, like how he always insisted on making our morning coffee, like how he would smile just a fraction too wide when he handed me my cup, like how that smile never quite reached his eyes. That morning, as I stumbled toward the bathroom, I caught him in the kitchen. He was standing by the counter, his back to me, hunched over our coffee mugs. In his hand was a small glass vial. I froze. Our eyes met in the reflection of the kitchen window. For just a moment, I saw something in his face, something cold, calculating, inhuman. Then he smiled. "Just vitamins, Mom," he said, slipping the vial into his pocket. "You and Dad need all the help you can get at your age." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. Because what mother wants to think her child capable of such darkness? But that metallic taste lingered, and with it, a memory I had buried for 25 years began to claw its way back to the surface. Before we continue, please subscribe to this channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. It helps keep this community alive, and it means everything to me that you're here. 3 days later, Dr. Mendoza called us into his office. The fluorescent lights hummed above us as he placed our blood work results on the desk. His hands were shaking. "Margaret Edward," he said, his voice heavy with something I would later recognize as horror. "Your tests show elevated levels of arsenic in your bloodstream. Chronic poisoning. Someone has been poisoning you." The room tilted. Edward grabbed my hand, but I barely felt it. Because in that moment, 25 years of carefully constructed denial came crashing down around me. I thought the greatest tragedy of my life had been losing my firstborn son, Richard, in a car accident 25 years ago. He was 32, brilliant, successful, beloved by everyone, the golden child. The police said he lost control on a rainy night, crashed into a tree. Case closed. Grief endured. But now, sitting in Dr. Mendoza's office, with poison in my veins, I remembered something I had forced myself to forget. The week before Richard died, I had heard him and David arguing. Richard's voice was sharp, angry. "You're jealous, David. You always have been. But that doesn't give you the right—" The door had slammed and I never heard the rest. David had been 23 then, unemployed, living in Richard's shadow, and I had dismissed it as sibling rivalry. Now I understood. Richard hadn't died in an accident. My youngest son had killed him. And now, 25 years later, he was trying to kill us too. The question was, why now? And more importantly, what was I going to do about it? Because let me tell you something about being a mother. You spend your whole life protecting your children. But when one of them becomes a monster, you have to make a choice. Do you protect the monster, or do you protect yourself? I chose survival. But this wasn't going to be just about surviving. This was going to be about making sure David paid for everything he had done. For Richard, for us, for every lie, every smile, every cup of poisoned coffee. The war had begun, and David had no idea who he was really dealing with. What I did next would change everything. Stay with me. They say hindsight is 20/20, but I think that's too generous. Hindsight is more like a cruel teacher who shows you all the answers after you've already failed the test. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when David first suggested moving in with us. It was March, 6 months before the diagnosis. Spring was trying to break through the winter cold, and Edward and I were having breakfast when David appeared at our door with 2 suitcases and a sob story about his marriage falling apart. "Claire and I need some space," he said, his eyes downcast in what I now recognize as practiced shame. "I thought maybe I could stay here for a while, help you guys out. You're not getting any younger." That last comment should have been my first clue. Edward and I were 60 years old, not ancient. We were healthy, active, independent. We didn't need help, but David had always known how to play on our sympathies, how to make himself seem vulnerable, victimized by circumstances beyond his control. So we said yes, because that's what parents do. We opened our door, our home, our lives to the child who would soon try to close ours forever. The first week, he was the perfect son. He cooked dinner, did the dishes, asked about our day with genuine seeming interest. Claire came by occasionally and they would argue in hushed tones in David's old bedroom. The performance was flawless. The second week, he started making our morning coffee. "Let me do this for you," he insisted when I tried to make it myself. "You raised me. It's the least I can do." Edward thought it was sweet. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. There was something about the way David watched us drink that coffee, the way his eyes would follow the cup from the counter to our lips, the way he would ask, "How does it taste? Good?" By the third week, we were sick. At first it was subtle, a headache that wouldn't quit, a stomach that churned at the smell of food. Edward said it was the flu. I thought maybe it was something we ate. David suggested we were working too hard, stressing too much. He insisted we rest, that he would take care of everything. And we believed him. Because he was our son. Because parents are conditioned to trust their children, to see the best in them even when the worst is staring them in the face. But I've always had this thing, this instinct that my mother used to call the knowing. It's a feeling in your gut that something is wrong, even when everything looks right. I felt it the night Richard died, a sudden cold dread that made me call his phone over and over until the police showed up at our door. I felt it when David was a teenager, and I found that dead bird in his closet, its neck broken, arranged carefully in a shoebox. He said he found it that way, that he was going to bury it. I wanted to believe him. The knowing was screaming at me now, so I started watching. Really watching. I noticed that David never drank from the same coffee pot he prepared for us. I noticed that when he thought we weren't looking, his expression would go blank, emotionless, like a mask had slipped. I noticed that Claire's visits became more frequent, and their whispered conversations more urgent. One afternoon, while David was out, I went into his room. My hands were shaking as I searched through his things. I felt like a spy in my own home, but the knowing wouldn't let me stop. In the back of his closet, under a pile of old clothes, I found it. A diary. Not the kind a person keeps for memories, the kind a person keeps for secrets. I sat on his bed and opened it. The first entry was dated 25 years ago, just days before Richard's death. "Richard thinks he's so much better than me. Mom and Dad think so too. They never say it, but I see it in their eyes. The disappointment when they look at me, the pride when they look at him. But Richard has a secret. He drives too fast when it rains. One day that's going to be a problem for him." My blood ran cold. I flipped through the pages, my horror growing with each entry. David documented everything. How he had tampered with Richard's brakes, how he had checked the weather forecast and called Richard that night, making up an emergency to get him on the road during the storm. How he had watched the news the next day with appropriate sadness while inside. He felt nothing but satisfaction. "They'll never know," he wrote. "And finally, I'll be the only son, the one who matters." But it hadn't worked out that way. Even in death, Richard remained the golden child, the son whose memory we cherished. And David had spent 25 years living in the shadow of a ghost, until he decided to erase us too. The diary was filled with calculations. How much arsenic, how often, how long it would take. He documented our symptoms with clinical precision. He and Claire had even discussed what they would do with our house, our money, our belongings. They had already picked out the headstone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to Edward, to the police, to show them everything. But I stopped myself, because I realized something important. If I exposed him now, he might find a way out. He might destroy the evidence. He might turn the story around, make himself the victim, make me look like a paranoid old woman. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to gather more proof. I needed to catch him in the act. I needed to make sure that when I destroyed him, there would be no coming back. So I put the diary back exactly where I found it. I walked out of his room, closed the door, and went downstairs where David was making dinner. "Smells wonderful, honey," I said, smiling at my son, the murderer. He smiled back. "Only the best for you, Mom." And in that moment, I became an actress in the most important role of my life, the role of a trusting mother. Because David needed to believe I suspected nothing. He needed to feel safe, comfortable, confident in his plan. Because while he was planning our deaths, I was planning something far more devastating, his complete and total destruction. The game had begun, and David had no idea I was even playing. There's a certain clarity that comes with knowing someone wants you dead. Every interaction becomes sharper, more focused. Every word carries weight. Every smile hides a strategy. I became two people. There was the Margaret that David saw, the weak, ailing mother growing more dependent by the day. And then there was the real Margaret, the one gathering evidence, documenting everything, preparing for war. The morning after I found the diary, I had to make a decision. Tell Edward or protect him by keeping him in the dark. I knew my husband. He was a good man, an honest man, but he was also emotional. If he knew what David was doing, he might confront him, and that would ruin everything. So I carried this terrible knowledge alone. Dr. Mendoza had put us on chelation therapy to remove the arsenic from our systems. But I made a calculated decision. I would keep taking just enough of David's poison to maintain the appearance of illness, while secretly purging it with higher doses of the chelation drugs than David knew about. I needed him to believe his plan was working. I needed him to get comfortable, to get sloppy. And people always get sloppy when they think they're winning. I started keeping a video diary, recording everything on my phone when David was out. I documented every cup of coffee he made, every meal he prepared. I installed a tiny camera in the kitchen, hidden in the clock above the stove. I watched him add the poison, his movements practiced and precise. He did it without hesitation, without remorse, the way someone might add sugar to their tea. One morning, about 2 weeks after my discovery, Claire came over for breakfast. I watched her from the hallway as she and David stood in the kitchen, speaking in low voices. "How much longer?" Claire asked, her voice tight with impatience. "Soon," David replied. "The doctor said Dad's kidneys are starting to show stress. Mom's not far behind, another month, maybe 2. We need to be careful. That doctor seems suspicious. Mendoza, he's useless. He thinks they're being exposed to something environmental. He has no idea it's coming from their own kitchen." Claire laughed, actually laughed. "I already have my eye on a condo downtown. Ocean view. We can sell this place for at least 800,000. "More," David corrected. "The neighborhood has gone up. I'm thinking closer to 1 million. They were planning their future on our graves, discussing real estate over our slowly poisoning bodies. And they felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, no humanity. I stood in that hallway, my phone recording every word, and I felt something shift inside me. The fear began to transform into something else, something colder, something that understood that mercy was not an option here. That evening, David made dinner, a beautiful roasted chicken with vegetables. He served Edward and me with such care, such attention. He even pulled out my chair for me. "You seem better today, Mom," he observed. "Your color is good." "I'm feeling stronger," I lied. "Maybe the medication is finally working." I saw the flicker of concern in his eyes. That wasn't what he wanted to hear. He needed us weak, dying, helpless. "Don't overdo it," he cautioned. "You need to rest. Let me take care of everything." "You're such a good son," I said, meeting his eyes. "I don't know what we'd do without you." The irony of that statement hung in the air between us, though only I could taste it. After dinner, I excused myself to bed early. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent hours going through Richard's old belongings, which I'd kept in boxes in the attic. I found photos of him and David as boys, Richard's arm around his younger brother's shoulders, both of them smiling at the camera. In Richard's face, I saw genuine affection. In David's, even then, I could see something hollow. There was a letter tucked into one of Richard's books. It was addressed to me, dated a week before his death, but never sent. "Mom, I need to talk to you about David. He's been saying some disturbing things. I think he needs professional help. I'm worried about what he might do if—" The letter ended there, unfinished. Richard had run out of time. Had he been planning to warn me? Had he suspected his own brother was capable of murder? I pressed the letter to my chest and cried silently in the dark attic. I cried for Richard, who had tried to sound the alarm. I cried for the mother I used to be, who had missed all the signs. I cried for Edward, who still believed our son loved us. But mostly, I cried because I knew what I had to do, and it terrified me even as it thrilled me. The next morning, I called Dr. Mendoza from my car, parked outside the grocery store where David thought I was shopping. "Doctor, I need your help," I said. "I know who's poisoning us, and I need you to help me catch him." There was a long pause. Then, "Margaret, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that my son is a murderer, and I'm going to prove it." I told him everything. The diary, the recordings, the videos. I told him about Richard, about Claire, about the conversation I'd overheard. "This is a matter for the police," he said. "The police need evidence that will hold up in court. I'm going to get that evidence. But I need you to keep treating us, keep the paper trail going, make notes about our symptoms, document everything, and when the time comes, I need you to testify." "This is dangerous, Margaret. If he realizes—" "He won't," I interrupted, "because he thinks I'm just a dying old woman who doesn't suspect a thing. He thinks he's smarter than me, smarter than everyone. That's his weakness, and I'm going to use it to bury him." Dr. Mendoza agreed to help. So did Martha, the nurse who had been administering our chelation therapy. She started secretly documenting every treatment, every dosage, creating a medical record that would show exactly what had been done to us and when. The net was closing around David, and he had no idea. One evening, about 3 weeks into my investigation, David sat with Edward and me in the living room. We were watching television, a family scene of domestic tranquility. David was on his laptop, supposedly working, but I could see his screen reflected in the window. He was on a real estate website browsing luxury homes. "Looking at something interesting?" I asked casually. He quickly closed the laptop. "Just browsing. Claire and I are thinking about our future." "That's nice," I said. "You should have a future. Everyone deserves that." He looked at me strangely, like he was trying to figure out if there was a hidden meaning in my words. There was, because I knew something he didn't. I knew that his future was going to be very different from the one he was imagining. Where he saw beach houses and freedom, I saw prison cells and justice. They thought I was defeated, broken, slowly dying in my own home. They thought I had surrendered to their plan without even knowing I was in a war. But they had no idea what I was preparing, and when I struck, it would be devastating. 3 months into the poisoning, David decided it was time to tighten his grip. He organized a family dinner, a gathering of relatives and friends to celebrate Edward's and my resilience in the face of our mysterious illness. It was a performance, and David was the director. The dinner was held at Claire's parents' house, a sprawling estate on the north side of town. 25 people attended: cousins, uncles, aunts, family friends, people who had known us for decades. David had even invited Dr. Mendoza and Martha, which I found particularly bold. Or perhaps he wanted witnesses to our decline, people who would testify to how sick we looked, how devoted he had been. Edward and I arrived looking the part, pale, thin, moving slowly. I had actually stopped taking as much of the salation medication for the past week, allowing the poison to build back up just enough to make my deterioration visible. It was a calculated risk, but I needed everyone to see what David had done to us. I needed them to understand the depth of his cruelty. David greeted us at the door with a hug that made my skin crawl. "Mom, Dad, I'm so glad you felt well enough to come," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "It means so much to have you here." Claire stood beside him, her hand on his arm, playing the role of the devoted daughter-in-law. She looked at me with what was supposed to be compassion, but read as impatience. How much longer until we died and she could have that ocean view condo? The dinner was elaborate, courses of expensive food that turned my stomach, wine that I pretended to sip. Everyone kept commenting on how wonderful it was that David had moved in to take care of us. What a blessing he was. How lucky we were to have such a devoted son. "He's been amazing," Edward said, his voice weak but sincere. "I don't know what we would have done without him." I watched David soak up the praise, his chest swelling with pride. This was what he wanted: recognition, admiration, the acknowledgement that he was the good son, the only son, the son who mattered. After dinner, Claire's father stood to make a toast. "To David," he said, raising his glass, "a man who exemplifies what it means to honor your parents. In a world where so many children abandon their elderly relatives, David has shown us what true devotion looks like." Everyone clinked glasses. Everyone agreed. David was wonderful. David was selfless. David was a hero. And then David himself stood up. "I want to say something," he began, his voice heavy with emotion. "These past months have been difficult. Watching my parents suffer from this mysterious illness has been heartbreaking. But I want them to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll be with them until the very end, however long that takes." The room fell silent. People were crying. Even I felt my eyes water, though not for the reasons they thought. "Mom," David said, turning to me, "I want you to know that I'll take care of everything when the time comes, and I pray that's many years from now. I'll make sure you and Dad are remembered the way you deserve. I'll honor your legacy. I promise." He raised his glass to me. Everyone joined him. The room exploded in applause. It was a masterful performance. David had just publicly positioned himself as the grieving, devoted son. When we died, no one would question his innocence. They would comfort him, support him, celebrate him for his sacrifice. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me in front of witnesses. As I sat there, surrounded by applauding people, I felt something cold and certain settle in my chest. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about making sure that when David fell, he fell hard. I wanted his humiliation to be as public as his glory. I wanted everyone who had praised him tonight to see exactly what he was. After the toasts, people began to mingle. I found myself in the kitchen with Dr. Mendoza and Martha, who were helping clean up. "Did you get all that?" I whispered to Martha. She patted her purse, where I knew she had hidden a recording device. Every word. Good, I said. We're going to need it. Dr. Mendoza looked troubled. Margaret, what are you planning? Justice, I replied. Public, undeniable, devastating justice. He wants to be celebrated as the perfect son. I'm going to show everyone what he really is, and I'm going to do it in front of all of them. When? Martha asked. Soon, I said. Very soon. I just need one more piece. That piece came 2 weeks later, in the form of a confession I hadn't even hoped for. David thought he was invincible now. The dinner had gone perfectly. Everyone loved him. He was home free, so he got careless. One night I pretended to fall asleep early in the living room. David and Claire thought I was unconscious, but I had learned to slow my breathing, to stay perfectly still, to listen. Another month, David said to Claire. 2 at most. The doctor says Dad's organs are shutting down. Mom's not far behind. Finally, Claire breathed. I was starting to think they'd never die. They're tough, David admitted. I'll give them that. But everyone has their limit, and I found theirs. Do you ever feel bad? Claire asked. About any of it? There was a pause. Then David laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my blood freeze. Why would I feel bad? Richard got what he deserved for being the favorite. And Mom and Dad? They made their choice 25 years ago when they mourned him like he was some kind of saint. They never saw me. Not really. So now they won't see anything at all. What about after? Claire pressed. The police? The investigation? There won't be one, David said confidently. They're old. They've been sick for months. The doctor will sign off on natural causes without a second thought. We're clear. My phone was recording everything from where I'd hidden it in the couch cushions. Every word, every laugh, every admission of guilt. I had him. But I wasn't going to just turn this over to the police. No. What I had planned would be so much better. Stay with me. What happens next will shock you. Revenge, I learned, is not a dish best served cold. It's a carefully constructed trap that springs shut at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way, leaving no escape and no mercy. I spent the next 2 weeks orchestrating the end of David's life as he knew it. Not his death. I'm not a murderer like my son, but something worse, his complete and total public destruction. First, I needed to secure the evidence. I made copies of everything, the diary entries, the video recordings, the audio confessions, the medical records showing the arsenic poisoning. I stored them in multiple locations, a safety deposit box, with Dr. Mendoza, with Martha, and with a lawyer I hired secretly. If anything happened to me before I could execute my plan, the truth would still come out. Second, I needed to stage the perfect moment for revelation. It needed to be public, undeniable, and devastating. It needed to be witnessed by everyone who had praised David, who had celebrated him as the perfect son. So I planned another family gathering. But this time, I was the one sending the invitations. The occasion? Edward's and my 41st anniversary. David thought it was a touching gesture, the dying couple celebrating one last milestone. He didn't know it would be his funeral. I invited everyone from the previous dinner, plus a few additions. Specifically, 2 police detectives I had been working with secretly, who would be present as family friends. I also invited a journalist who specialized in true crime stories, though she didn't know why yet. The morning of the anniversary party, I stopped taking David's poison entirely. I didn't tell him. I just poured out my coffee when he wasn't looking, replaced my breakfast with food I'd hidden in my bedroom. I wanted to be clear-headed, strong, present for what was coming. David noticed. "You look better, Mom," he said suspiciously. "I feel better," I replied honestly, "like I'm getting a second chance." I was, just not the way he thought. The party was held at our house, my choice. my territory, my rules. The guests arrived at 6 p.m., filling our living room with flowers and gifts and well wishes. David played his role perfectly, the devoted son attending to his frail parents. But I wasn't frail anymore. I was sharp, focused, ready. At 7 p.m., I asked everyone to gather in the living room. I had prepared what David thought was a thank you speech, a touching tribute to family and love and support during difficult times. Instead, I gave them the truth. "Thank you all for coming," I began, standing at the front of the room with Edward beside me, looking confused but supportive. Edward and I wanted to celebrate this anniversary with the people we love most. But we also wanted to share something important with you, something that might be difficult to hear. I saw David shift in his seat. Claire's eyes narrowed. 6 months ago, Edward and I started getting sick. Strange symptoms, unexplainable illnesses. We thought it was age or stress or just bad luck. I paused, letting the room settle into uncomfortable silence. But 3 months ago, we discovered the truth. We were being poisoned, deliberately, with arsenic. Gasps filled the room. People looked at each other in shock. "The police are investigating," I continued, nodding to the detectives who were now standing. "But I wanted you all to know tonight because the person who has been poisoning us is in this room." More gasps. David stood up, his face a mask of concern. "Mom, what are you saying? This is crazy. You're not well." "Sit down, David," I said coldly. He froze. Something in my voice, in my eyes, made him understand. "The game was over. I found your diary," I said softly. "I found the entries about Richard, about how you killed him 25 years ago, about how you've been planning to kill us too." The room erupted. People were shouting, crying, trying to process what they were hearing. David's face had gone white. "That's insane," he stammered. "She's delusional. The illness." "I have video of you putting poison in our coffee," I interrupted. "I have audio recordings of you and Claire discussing our deaths, planning what to do with our money, our house. I have medical records showing arsenic poisoning. I have testimony from Dr. Mendoza and Martha about your behavior." I turned to face him directly. "I have everything, David. Every lie, every betrayal, every murder you committed or planned. And now everyone knows what you really are." David looked around the room wildly, searching for support, for sympathy, for an escape. But everyone was staring at him with horror. Claire stood up, trying to run for the door. The detectives blocked her path. "David Hayes, Claire Hayes," Detective Morrison said, pulling out handcuffs. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the murder of Richard Hayes." As they read him his rights, David looked at me with pure hatred. "You can't do this," he hissed. "I'm your son." "No," I said quietly. "My son died 25 years ago. You're just the monster who killed him." They dragged him out in handcuffs, Claire screaming behind him. The room was in chaos. People were crying, shouting questions, demanding answers. But I felt nothing except cold satisfaction. The next day, the story hit the news. The journalist I'd invited wrote a feature article that went viral. "The Perfect Son, a mother's 25-year journey to justice." David's face was on every screen, every newspaper, every website. The trial lasted 6 months. Every piece of evidence I'd gathered was admitted: the diary, the videos, the recordings, the medical testimony. It was overwhelming, undeniable, devastating. David tried to claim I had fabricated everything, that I was a bitter old woman seeking attention. But the evidence spoke for itself. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. David was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole for Richard's murder, plus additional years for attempting to murder Edward and me. Claire received 25 years as an accomplice. As David was led away, he looked at me one last time. I expected to see rage, hatred, defiance. Instead, I saw something I never thought I'd see in my son's eyes: fear, because he finally understood what I had known all along. You can't defeat a mother's love, not even with poison. The war was over. I had won. But the victory came with a price that would haunt me forever. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word fell like a hammer sealing David's fate. I sat in the front row, Edward's hand in mine, watching our son's life end even as he continued breathing. Some people in the gallery were crying. Others wore expressions of grim satisfaction. The families of other victims. Yes, we discovered there were others. People David had stolen from, manipulated, hurt over the years, finally had their closure. But I felt hollowed out, empty, like I had won the war, but lost something essential in the process. The media circus that followed was overwhelming. Our story became national news. "Mother outsmarts murderous son," the headlines screamed. 25-year cold case solved by victim's own mother. They called me brave, clever, inspirational. They wanted interviews, book deals, movie rights. I declined everything because they didn't understand. This wasn't a triumph. This was a tragedy that I had simply refused to let destroy me completely. Edward took it harder than I expected. He hadn't fully believed, even with all the evidence, until he heard David's confession played in court. The recording of David laughing about Richard's death, about our planned deaths, about his complete lack of remorse. When the tape ended, Edward broke down, sobbing in the courtroom. "How did we not see it?" he kept asking me at night. "What did we do wrong? How did we raise a monster?" I didn't have answers for him. I still don't. Some people are born with something missing, something dark where love should be. We could have been perfect parents, and David still would have been David, but that didn't make it hurt less. 3 months after the trial ended, I stood at Richard's grave for the first time in years. I had avoided it, the pain too raw, too overwhelming. But now I had something to tell him. "I got him, sweetheart," I whispered to the headstone. "I got justice for you, for us. He's going to prison for the rest of his life." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could have sworn I felt Richard's presence, his approval, his peace. But as I turned to leave, I saw Claire standing near the cemetery gates. She had been released on bail pending her appeal. Our eyes met across the grass. She walked towards me slowly, her face gaunt, aged beyond her years. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I want you to know," she said, "that I never wanted to hurt you. I loved David. I thought I was helping him. I didn't know about Richard until it was too late. And by then..." She broke off, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything, but I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. Part of me wanted to rage at her, to scream, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain we had endured. But another part of me saw a woman who had been manipulated by a master manipulator, who had made terrible choices but wasn't born evil like David. "You could have stopped him," I said finally. "You could have come to us, told us the truth. You chose not to. That's something you'll have to live with." She nodded, accepting the judgment. "I know. I'll live with it every day for the rest of my life." As she walked away, I realized something. Revenge had given me justice, but it couldn't give me peace. That was something I would have to find on my own. The media attention eventually faded, as it always does. New scandals emerged. New tragedies captured the public's attention. Edward and I were left to rebuild our lives from the ashes of what David had destroyed. But something unexpected happened. People started reaching out to me. Elderly people who suspected they were being abused by family members. Adult children who had lost parents under suspicious circumstances. Social workers who needed help identifying financial exploitation of seniors. They saw me as someone who had fought back and won, Someone who proved that even when you're vulnerable, even when you're being actively victimized, you can still find the strength to fight. And that's when I realized my story couldn't end with David's conviction. It had to become something more, something that could help others. 6 months after the trial, I founded Forgotten Voices, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting elderly people from abuse, neglect, and exploitation by family members and caregivers. We provided legal support, medical advocacy, counseling, and most importantly, we believed people when they said something was wrong. Edward became my partner in this new mission. We poured our savings into the foundation, hired investigators and lawyers and social workers. We created a hotline that anyone could call anonymously to report suspected elder abuse. In the first year, we helped 23 families. We uncovered 4 cases of financial exploitation, 2 cases of medical neglect, and 1 case, God help us, of poisoning similar to what we had endured. A 68-year-old man whose daughter had been slowly killing him with antifreeze to collect his life insurance. We saved his life, and in saving his life, we found purpose in our own. Every person we helped was a small redemption. Every case we solved was proof that David hadn't destroyed us. He had transformed us into something stronger, something that could fight back against the darkness we now knew existed in the world. But the nightmares didn't stop. I still woke up sometimes, tasting metal in my mouth, panic rising in my chest. I still saw David's face in crowds, heard his voice in empty rooms. The trauma of what he did, what he tried to do, left scars that would never fully heal. Therapy helped. Talking to other survivors helped. But most of all, the work helped. Every life we saved was a small piece of my own soul restored. One afternoon, about a year after David's conviction, Dr. Mendoza came to visit me at the Forgotten Voices office. He had become our medical consultant, helping us identify signs of poisoning and abuse in the cases we investigated. "I have something to show you," he said, pulling out a folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from people across the country who had heard our story and wanted to share their own. "Margaret," one letter read, "I'm 72 years old, and my son has been stealing my Social Security checks for 3 years. I thought I was going crazy. I thought it was my fault. But your story gave me the courage to report him. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to fight back." Another. "My mother died 2 years ago, under circumstances I always found suspicious. The doctors called it natural causes, but I knew something was wrong. After hearing your story, I pushed for an autopsy. They found poison. My brother has been arrested. Thank you for teaching me to trust my instincts." Letter after letter, story after story. Lives changed because I had refused to be a victim. Families saved because I had chosen to fight. Dr. Mendoza looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Do you see what you've done? You've started a movement, Margaret. You've given voice to the voiceless." But it wasn't enough. Not yet, because there was still one more person I needed to confront. 2 years after his conviction, I went to see David in prison. Edward didn't want me to go. Our therapist advised against it. But I needed closure in a way that the trial couldn't provide. I needed to look my son in the eyes one more time and understand, really understand, how he could have done what he did. The visiting room was cold, sterile, separated by thick glass. David was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed. He had lost weight, his face gaunt and pale. But his eyes, those eyes were the same. Cold, empty, calculating. We sat in silence for a long moment, the phone receivers pressed to our ears. "Why did you come?" he finally asked. "I need to understand," I said. "I need to know why." "Why, Richard? Why us? What did we do to make you hate us so much?" David laughed, that same hollow laugh I remembered from the night he confessed to Claire. "You really don't get it, do you? It was never about hate. It was about being invisible. Invisible, I repeated. All my life, I was the other son. The one who wasn't as smart, wasn't as successful, wasn't as loved. Richard was the golden child, and I was just there. Do you know what that does to a person? To grow up knowing your parents wish you were someone else? That's not true, I protested. We loved you. You loved the idea of me, he interrupted. But you never really saw me, not the real me. Even after Richard died, you mourned him more than you ever loved me alive. I was living in a ghost's shadow. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but something in his words struck a painful chord. Had we been so consumed by grief for Richard that we failed to truly see David? That doesn't justify murder, I said quietly. It doesn't justify trying to kill your own parents. I know, David said, and for the first time, I heard something like emotion in his voice. Not remorse exactly, but acknowledgement. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I'm a monster. I've always known. But at least now, people know my name. They'll remember me. I won't be invisible anymore. And there it was. The truce that made my blood run cold. David hadn't killed for money or revenge or even hatred. He had killed for recognition, for significance. He would rather be remembered as a monster than forgotten as nothing. You're right, I said, standing to leave. You won't be invisible anymore, but you won't be remembered the way you think. You'll be a cautionary tale, a warning, the son who threw away everything because he couldn't appreciate what he had. And me? I'll be remembered as the mother who stopped you, who chose the living over the dead, who turned your evil into something good. I hung up the phone and walked away. I didn't look back, because David was right about one thing. I had spent too long looking backward, grieving for what was lost instead of fighting for what remained. That was the last time I saw him, and I was at peace with that. The hardest battle was over. But my real work, the work that would define the rest of my life, was just beginning. Today is my 68th birthday. 8 years have passed since the day I discovered the metallic taste in my mouth was arsenic. 8 years since I learned my son wanted me dead. I'm sitting in the office of Forgotten Voices headquarters. We expanded 3 years ago and now have branches in 12 states. The walls are covered with photos of the people we've helped, letters of gratitude, news clippings about cases we've solved. Over 800 families have been protected because of this organization. 800 lives saved or dramatically improved. Edward is here with me, healthy and vibrant at 68. The arsenic is long purged from our systems, though we still go for regular checkups. Dr. Mendoza insists on it, and we've learned to listen to him. He saved our lives, after all.
Martha, the nurse who helped document our case, is now our director of medical advocacy. She trains other medical professionals to recognize signs of elder abuse, to ask the right questions, to believe patients when they report suspicions. The foundation has become my legacy, the good that came from unimaginable evil. But more than that, it's become my purpose. Every morning, I wake up knowing that what happened to us wasn't meaningless. It was transformed into something that protects others.
But I'd be lying if I said it was easy. The trauma lingers. I still can't drink coffee without a moment of hesitation. I still wake up sometimes with my heart racing, tasting phantom metal on my tongue. Edward has nightmares where he's back in that house, slowly dying, unable to escape. We go to therapy together twice a month. We've learned that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about learning to live again after someone tried to kill you, especially when that someone was your own child. People ask me if I've forgiven David. The answer is complicated. I forgive the little boy I raised, the child who I believe was born with something broken inside him that no amount of love could fix. I forgive myself for not seeing it sooner, for missing the signs, for choosing to believe the best instead of accepting the worst. But do I forgive the man who murdered my firstborn son and tried to murder me? No. Some things are unforgivable, and that's okay. Forgiveness isn't required for healing. Sometimes acceptance is enough. David is still in prison. He'll die there. He writes to me occasionally. Strange, rambling letters that I never respond to. He seems to think that if he explains himself enough times, I'll understand. I'll sympathize. I'll visit him again. He still doesn't understand that I already understand. I understand that he's a narcissist, a sociopath, possibly a psychopath. I understand that he's incapable of genuine remorse or empathy. I understand that he sees himself as the victim in all of this. And I understand that none of that is my responsibility to fix. Claire was released from prison 2 years ago after serving her sentence. I heard she moved across the country, changed her name, started over. Part of me hopes she found redemption. Part of me doesn't care. She made her choices and she has to live with them. Last month, I received a letter from a woman named Patricia. She's 71, living in Oregon, and her story was heartbreakingly familiar. Her daughter had been giving her sleeping pills mixed with other medications, causing confusion and memory loss. The daughter was planning to have Patricia declared incompetent so she could take control of her finances. But Patricia remembered my story. She called our hotline. We connected her with a lawyer, got her to a safe house, and helped her file criminal charges. Her daughter is now awaiting trial, and Patricia is living with her sister, safe and healthy. You saved my life, Patricia wrote. But more than that, you showed me that being old doesn't mean being powerless. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for refusing to be a victim. Thank you for showing the rest of us how to survive. That's why I share my story. Not for fame or recognition or sympathy, but because somewhere right now, someone is being hurt by someone they trust. Someone is being poisoned, manipulated, abused, exploited, and they need to know they're not alone. They need to know they can fight back. They need to know that even in your 60s, 70s, 80s, you still have power. The power to say no. The power to investigate. The power to expose the truth. The power to survive. I look at Edward across the office and he smiles at me. That same smile he gave me on our first date 48 years ago. We survived. Not just the poisoning, but the aftermath, the grief, the betrayal, the trauma. We survived together and we came out stronger. People say you can't choose your family, that's true. But you can choose how to respond when your family hurts you. You can choose truth over denial, justice over enabling, survival over victimhood. The metallic taste is gone now, but I remember it. I remember it every time someone calls our hotline, every time we help a family, every time we save a life. Because that taste, that first warning that something was terribly wrong, became the catalyst for everything that followed. The investigation, the evidence, the trial, the conviction, the foundation, the movement. One small moment of awareness changed everything. So I'll say this to anyone listening. Anyone who has that nagging feeling that something isn't right. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. Trust that inner voice that says, something is wrong here. You might be old. You might be sick. You might be dependent on the very people who are hurting you. But you are not powerless. You are not helpless. You are not invisible. And you deserve better than to be poisoned by people who are supposed to love you. I'm Margaret Hayes. I'm 68 years old. My son tried to kill me, but I chose to live. I chose to fight. I chose to transform my tragedy into a movement that has saved hundreds of lives. The real antidote to poison isn't medicine. It's courage. The courage to face the truth, no matter how painful. The courage to fight back, no matter how scared you are. The courage to choose life, even when death seems easier. If this story touched you, if it resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to this channel and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. Share this story. Let it be a reminder that evil only wins when good people stay silent. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Your life matters. And remember, sometimes the poison is in the coffee cup and the murderer is sitting right beside you. But if I could survive and fight back, so can you. Thank you for listening to my story. May you never need it. But if you do, may it give you the strength to save yourself. Because you are worth saving. Always.